maybe let's just put a little disclaimer out there because we don't want to put people off what we're going to be talking about. And that is that we are not here to put down other styles of singing. So it's not about putting down classical music. I have, and you have the highest respect for our classical colleagues. And it's not about that. For me, as a CCM teacher, ex-performer, advocate, I just want to be able to stand alongside my classical colleagues and be respected and valued in the same way. So I just want to put that out there.
Yeah.
Okay, and so can we start with this question? Do you both acknowledge there is a bias against popular music in higher education?
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so now we've,
Started.
yes, sorry, I just want to
say-
get the address the elephant in the room straight up.
Yes, it's changing, and we can't say that it is definitely, it's tilting, it's tipping. We're getting closer towards the tipping point where it's going to really tip. I don't think we're quite there yet. Not from the stories I'm hearing from other colleagues. I don't think we're quite at the tipping point, but we're not at where it was 13 years ago when we came to Shenandoah.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it's definitely
No.
not where when we started.
It's
Yes.
no.
I mean,
no.
one of my graduate advisors said to me, I don't quite, he said, I need to talk to you about what you're teaching. And I was like, okay. And he said, I'm concerned about your future. And I said, okay, why? He's like, you really seem set on learning to do this musical theater and pop rock stuff. And I just don't think you're going to be able to find a job doing that. And I was like, okay. And
Okay.
it didn't work out that way. It worked out pretty well in my favor. But
I think so. I think
Yeah.
so. So what has inspired both of you to do this research work? Because you started researching quite a number of years ago.
Yeah. So in 2012 or 2010, when I got here, my position was created because the theater department wanted this pop rock specialist. The voice department wasn't so keen on it. It's different now. Now we have great relationships. But they were very hesitant to bring in a pop rock specialist who only taught pop rock was a big move. And so I met some resistance with things that I wanted to change and things that I wanted to do different. And I was meeting resistance from other colleagues, just at conferences and things that I had been attending.
Mhm.
And what I really wanted to know is why? Why is this such a problem? And so that was my first big research question that I started with is why does this bias exist? And if we understand that, then maybe we can start to move forward and move beyond it. And so in 2012, I gave my first talk on ethno-historical barriers against contemporary commercial music voice pedagogy at the Voice Foundation annual symposium in Philadelphia. And what I talked about there was how the aristocrats in New York City were trying to create a cultural landscape that could rival what was seen in Europe, which was the homeland for most of the immigrants in that part of the country at the time. And that the aristocrats were building these opera houses, fully donor funded. They were making a special elevated place of practice for this music. They believed that this music was superior and that everybody should be taught to like it. And there was also, I was starting to find hints of some pretty racist language also referring to Black Americans at the time and the way that they talked about the way the Black Americans sang. And so I started saying in 2012, look, I think that some of our biases have been passed down generationally. And that's how I ended this talk. I was like, if we go back to our great-great-grand teacher and we look at what our great-great-grand teacher was living in a world, they were living in a world where racism was rampant and classism was rampant. And then they taught the next generation who taught the next generation who taught us. And so if this is a system where you have to, it's a political system, academia is, everything is voted on. You can't make any changes without voting. You can't get through the program without being voted on in the form of juries. So you have a voting system that determines who gets through and who doesn't. And that system had its roots back in this period. And I knew that that's where this all started. Well, we had been talking about this a lot, and then we love to go antique shopping. And so we're out antique shopping one day, and we see these magazines called Etude magazine, and I pick them up. I'm like, Jackie, here's a music teacher magazine. Let's look at this.
Which I knew what these were. I don't think that you really. My piano teacher, when I was in middle school into high school, she had a lot of cats, and she had a lot of Etude magazines. She had all of her teachers. She had a lot of her previous teachers' Etude magazines. Do you know what the Etude magazine is?
No.
Okay. So here's one of them that we have, and this is from 1940, which we can talk about the cover here in a minute. But it's got ads in here. It's got articles written by different composers, conductors.
Incredible.
There's sheet music in here. There's all kinds of stuff, and I cannot remember the date that it was started.
It was around 1889.
Yeah. So, but it was meant for the private music teacher, and a lot of these teachers would keep these magazines and they would refer back to them because they would have sheet music in it. And if you are a private teacher, like 100 years ago, you really had no other outlet. You had no other like community. You would just get these magazines and you would read them. So he didn't know what they were. We pick them up. We start looking through them. We're like, well, I wonder if we can find stuff about voice teaching in these books. At the antique store, Matt sees these Etude magazines. He's never seen them before. I've seen them. I give him like a brief history of what they are. And we start looking through them to see if we can find voice teaching stuff. Like, what were they talking about? Were they, talking about bel canto? What were they saying? We would love to know. We start looking through them, and we start uncovering some not so
blatantly racist talk about the way that people sing.
Yeah.
And so
Really?
trigger warning of some language, but the term that's used a lot is savage. And singing like the savage.
Trash
music.
Like ragtime
Yes.
was considered trashy.
Yes.
And talking about shout singing, and shout singing was specifically associated with Black Americans at that time, and they always talked about it in a negative light. And all of a sudden a light bulb went off, and I was like, this has got something to do with what we're researching.
Yeah.
We've been digging and knowing we were missing stuff, and this might be what we're missing. And so Jackie comes home and goes down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, so because I had nothing else to do. It was during COVID.
It was during
we
COVID.
We had like nothing else.
This is amazing.
We just got vaccinated, but we're still gonna stay home, and like so I start looking up. I'm like, well, I wonder if we can find online. I mean, these were written 100 years ago. I'm sure that we can find all these articles. So I start like Googling like in the Etude, because you can go to the Etude website and you can put in keywords and then articles will pop up. So I started putting in trashy music, or I put trashy in there, and all kinds of stuff came up. There's even there's a really great dissertation I'm reading right now called "Evil at a Glance." I cannot remember the guy who wrote it, but
when was it written?
But it was maybe 1996, maybe 2002.
A lot of them were in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, maybe, and I can get you that information afterwards. But it's really great because it's talking about like the different political cartoons that were in there. And so then I start researching, I start looking, and then I start noticing names that are popping up that I'm recognizing. And there's one issue in particular from I think 1924 called The Jazz Problem. And I was like, oh, there's a jazz problem. Like,
Houston, we have a problem.
I had no idea.
It's called jazz.
Problem, but it was a problem. And so I start reading like, oh, there's a whole magazine, a whole issue dedicated to the jazz problem.
And this is important because
because I'm going to go on a tangent. I could go for years on this.
So, but the jazz problem issue is really important because it really shows what people were actually thinking. They say the quiet part out loud. And so, whereas for a lot of times, like you could tell and you could read between the lines how they felt about jazz. In this issue, people
it had
come
Mahler.
out.
It had Gustav Mahler.
Mahler's in a different issue, talking about something.
Okay.
But it's Sousa, and the person who's important is Frank Damrosch, who's the head of Juilliard.
He created Juilliard.
What's now,
what is now Juilliard. It was not called
Institute of Musical Arts. But and Frank Damrosch was a huge figure in New York society at that time, in their musical society. And
He's a
he
German immigrant.
is the person that says this is the music of a primitive people. It might be funny, but it's not real, and basically it's garbage. And some of the terminology that he uses is kind of blatantly racist, along with some of the other language. And we realized that we weren't, this hunch that we had for a long time that this was part of the issue was part of the issue. And that magazine kind of nails, it was the thing when we saw that, we're like, okay, so we are onto something.
But then,
there is an issue here.
But then my wheels kept turning. I'm like, who's Frank Damrosch? Because I had no idea who he was at the time. So I start Googling him, find out Juilliard, and they're like, okay, so who's the guy who created Etude? How did this all happen? How did, like, this is a guy saying this stuff about popular music at the time, which is jazz, and he's definitely against it. And he also helped create Juilliard. So then we look at Etude. We find out that Theodore Presser created Etude magazine. Who is Theodore Presser? So then we find out who he is. He ended up creating he was a pianist, but he wasn't that great of a pianist. He went to Germany because that's where everybody was going in the late 1800s. Everybody was going to Germany because that's where you learn how to play piano better. So he goes there. He loves Leipzig. He loves all the things that are going on there. He comes back to America. I don't know all the ins and outs, but he was teaching at different universities. I think little universities here and there.
And
he
wanted music teachers to be taken more seriously.
He did, and he created the MTNA, which is the Music Teacher National Association, and he created the MTNA, which was an organization for teachers to music teachers to get together. But when he created the MTNA, which I think was really great, I mean, I don't think we would have NATS. We would not have NATS. We would not have NASM, which is, accreditation. So we wouldn't have all these things. I think what he really wanted was a really great thing. But what he ended up doing with the MTNA is then he created the Etude magazine. And so I came up with a whole flow chart, and I don't have it with me right now. But he created a trifecta. And this was right around the time, this is right after a really great big recession that happened in the 1890s. And he created the MTNA. And if you have a membership to the MTNA, you get a discount for the Etude magazine, for sheet music. Yep. Is that how did it work?
So
oh my gosh!
Basically, you get into MTNA. You then subscribe to Etude magazine.
Yes.
If you sign enough students up, you can win prizes for signing your students up to Etude magazine. Then they get a monthly publication that does have sheet music in it, but it also has articles about how they should think about music. And if you look at the cover of this cover is very telling of this magazine, because what they wanted you to think about music is that music possesses powers that exalt and ennoble mankind. And on this image, you'll see the church, the school, and the home. Because the belief was that music was from God, and music was a sacred thing. Yep. It was a disciplined thing, and it would help you become a better human. And throughout this magazine, they talk about it being our duty as music teachers to reach down to the common people and lift them up to appreciate good music. Not to teach them the music that they like, which is popular. Now, they also, in some issues, it depends on who's writing. Some people did say, look, we should take advantage of popular music, let them play that, and then lift them up to actually learn what good music is. So then not only do the teachers share this with their students, the teachers then can buy sheet music at a discount from Theodore Presser's publishing house and then sell that sheet music to their students. And then Presser is making such a great revenue stream, he goes around and starts buying up all of the other music publishing houses and takes over a whole city block in Philadelphia.
Like 2 years. It took 2 years for him to do that. He had a publishing company in Lynchburg, Virginia, and it was small, and then within 2 years he ended up in Philadelphia. It was huge. I mean, so this is like all private music teachers were reading this. This was sacred. This was the newspaper for them.
Well,
this sounds like a cult.
Well, it's right. So
it does. I mean, if it was a religion, it would be a cult, because you're indoctrinating people and you're telling them what they should like, what they shouldn't like, what is good singing, what is bad singing, what is good music, what is cultured music. It is so wrong and so unethical on so many levels.
And it wasn't even just music that was talked about in there. There's also political things that are, it's social evils, even like social things that people are doing that would be evils. That's
Mm.
etude. And then when
And
you,
then, but I think the key
yeah,
thing
yeah.
is Etude hits a peak subscriber run of 240,000. So
Oh,
there's
Yeah.
240,000 people a month getting this magazine. Now, another thing that's important to understand is like technology is always changing things in this world, and the magazine was technology for
That
that
was
era.
media. That was the
That was
media.
media. And so there is a magazine explosion that happens in the late 19th century and the early 20th century where there's a magazine for almost everything that you can think of. There are around 10 other music magazines at this time. Etude's the most popular and the one that's really directed at teachers. But you're right. This does have the impact of indoctrinating everybody who reads it. Now, again, Theodore Presser was doing good things.
He
We have
was.
to acknowledge that Theodore Presser set up scholarships for kids who were poor and couldn't afford lessons. Theodore Presser set up a home for, well, he called it at first for aged musicians. No one would enroll in going to this home. So then he changed it to a
Retired, wasn't it?
retirement
Yes.
community. And then he made a home for teachers, music
Yeah.
teachers who didn't have enough means to support themselves. They could go to this retirement home. For his employees at his publishing house, he built an entire community for them where they could get houses and apartments at half the cost of what they would have been in the public marketplace. So he cared deeply
Yeah.
about people, but he's also a product of his era. And
yes.
all of this is taking place. And what's important is MTNA comes out of this. Later comes the National Association for Schools of Music, which is the accrediting body that to this day accredits all schools of music in the United States. Out of this group comes the National Association of Teachers of Singing, NATS. And also out of this group, well, from NASM and the College Music Society and all of this comes the idea of a doctorate degree. And the doctorate degree gets started in 1953. And that starts really, now you have to have, we start moving and accelerating towards you need a doctorate to teach in academia. And that date is important because the structure for the doctorate degree is built in 1953. And in 1954 in the United States is the case Brown versus Board of Education. And that is the time when the Supreme Court rules that segregation is illegal. And we start seeing the desegregation of the schools. So when you're looking at the time that our professional organizations were developed, they were developed in a time of segregation and in a time when popular music was vaudeville shows, which have their roots in minstrel shows, which also includes ragtime music, the blues, and jazz, which all come from Black Americans. So
Yes.
popular music isn't just popular. They had parlor songs. Parlor songs were written by white composers. They still didn't like them in Etude magazine. Some people advocated for them. A lot were against it. They tolerated that. But then when you really get into jazz and the blues, you start seeing a lot of intolerance.
Yes.
That's where people start drawing a line and saying, no, that's not okay. And actually, we were already doing that. You're just saying that Black people came up with this, but actually the Irish did, and this is our thing, but it's not a good thing.
Or we've been doing syncopation. They stole syncopation from
us. And
that's
so,
one of the things that Gustav Mahler says too.
Yes. Who's also says, and Gustav Mahler again says the part out loud that we had a feeling was there but hadn't found yet, where he says in his own writing, he writes an article for Etude, and he's talking about different people, and he says, I cannot bring myself to believe that all men are created equal. That is beyond my comprehension.
I know.
So again, it's not like this isn't, I think what's so hard is when you have these conversations, this isn't about canceling anybody, but this is just understanding. If we go back to the core question, which is why? Why is popular music not in academia? This is why.
Absolutely.
And I know, because I know that we spent a lot of time on Etude, but then
no, but it's important.
But also, no, it is important. But one of the things too, like, where did this come from? Where did this thought that popular music is so bad, or that European music is so much higher? And you have to also look at the Gilded Age. You have to look at a Reconstruction after the Civil War, and you had this second industrial revolution that was happening at that time, and you had all these really rich people like the Rockefellers, J.P. Morgan, Carnegie, who are some of the other I'm trying to think of other big Vanderbilts, and they were high money, very elite. And so in the Gilded Age, they had a type of etiquette or a culture that they wanted um, to hold on to. But where did that culture come from? One of the people that wrote about the culture of the Gilded Age and where they wanted to keep that elitism was Ward McAllister, and he wrote, oh, what was the name of the book? He wrote a whole book about
Well, he went to Europe and
going
he
to
studied
Europe.
etiquette
Yes,
in
and
Europe
and then he brought it back, and he was hosting parties
with the
for
Astor
with the
family.
Astor family, and making sure that all these European ideals were still staying there. So if it wasn't European, it was not good. It was not
Mm.
elite. One of the
Yes.
places that I go to and I think of is where this kind of culture change happened. I'm not going to get too into it, but would be the Astor Place riot that happened. I think it was in the late 1840s, where it was a riot that happened where people actually died in New York City, and it was literally American performing against European performing, and the
Of
American
Shakespeare.
of Shakespeare, and the Americans were not happy with the European, and it happened in Astor Place. It happened at the Astor Place Opera House, and they weren't happy with it. They did not want this European coming in and doing Shakespeare acting the way that the European was. They wanted to keep
Hmm.
their American way of doing it.
And they burnt the place
They
down.
did. They burnt
So
the yeah.
there were gunshots, the militia was brought in, people were killed, the
Oh.
place was burnt down. So when we talk about a culture war,
Yeah.
this is literally
And
Hmm.
violence being instigated
Hmm.
over high culture
yeah.
and low
Hmm.
culture in the founding of this
And
country's artistic
yes.
landscape.
And you fast forward 50 years and you have the Gilded Age, and you have all this, the rich people having all these big fancy parties and everything, and then you have the Rockefellers and you have the Carnegies who are funding some of these universities and these symphony halls, and they're part of it. And so
Okay.
if you have Carnegie, who's part of this, like, I must keep everything very high art, it must be high art, it must be European, and he's hanging out with Frank Damrosch, which he was, and he helped create and fund and build Juilliard, or a lot of those rich people were doing that at that time. They're not going to want popular music there because it's not elite enough for them.
And
Hmm.
what's interesting too, and again, this is a United States problem. Here we charge people for college in astronomical sums of money.
Yes.
We've
Yes.
always, so college did start at one point in time in being free or super low cost. Eventually people realized, oh, if you go to college you make more money, maybe they should pay for that. Then they started charging
Yes.
for college. Then some of the colleges would give out loans from the college itself, but you basically couldn't go to college unless you had family money until the 1950s. And the only reason we get funding for anybody to go to college who's not from the upper levels of income was because of our technology war with Russia, when we had the race to space. And the government realized we need more scientists, we need more mathematicians, we need more engineers if we're going to keep up with the Russians. So they create a federal student loan program so that anybody can get into college because they need people in order to make something happen. But that doesn't really open the door for arts. We see then the
No.
GI Bill start to open the door where people can go to major in things. We see a more music program starting to come up. Donors are starting to give money to create these schools. It's not until the 1960s where we really start getting student loans that help enable the growth and expansion of all of these things. And that's right around the
Right.
same time that we see a growth and explosion of opera in the United States. Opera America is founded in 1970 with 20 member companies. They get all the way up over 100 companies by the 1990s. That's their peak. And in their peak, 50% of their ticket sale or their budget was coming from ticket sales. Now it's around 29%.
Hmm.
So opera had an explosion of popularity, but you look at it and it was because of Pavarotti, it was because of the three tenors. There was more and more of a growth of the middle class, people who had money, who wanted to be part of this cultural world that had been created during the Gilded Age. And there's admiration for it. But corporations also had big control over what we listened to because they controlled the record labels. They were in control of the
Right.
record labels and what we listened to. But then when you get to the 1990s, and this gets a little bit into the SWOT article, is when you get to the 1990s and we get Napster and we get internet music streaming, now anybody can put out music. And now you as a listener can listen to anything you want to,
Right.
whenever you want to. As
Exactly.
that starts exploding, we start to see more and more growth of things. We see the growth of musical theater, right? Musical theater starts to explode as well. And now we no longer have only this high level of culture that the aristocracy is controlling. We now have a consumer-based culture that's been growing since the 50s with Elvis Presley and the beginnings of rock and roll. It was coming out of the jazz era as well, even though they tried to suppress it. And it just snowballs and snowballs until today, the upper class now listen to rock and roll. I mean, Kanye married into a very upper class family.
Oh,
And
yes,
so,
so upper
you know,
class.
yeah. And so, there's, it's a different world now. And that's what we're bringing up in part of the SWOT article is music enrollment is falling. It's without a doubt it's falling. It's projected to fall worse than it already has. And so that's why we also feel like now, if there's ever been a time that it's been more urgent, it's now. Opera companies are struggling. They're closing. University music programs are struggling. Some of them are closing. We know that the enrollment trends are going down, and we know it could be as bad as a 59% decrease in enrollment 10 years from now compared to what we have now, which is already 33% down from 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so, this is why the history is fascinating, is it
Yeah.
It
starts to
is.
explain
It
how
is.
we got here
Yeah.
and then how it
Yes.
started to unravel, and why
Yes.
there's never been a better time than now to start looking around and going, okay, so the world has changed. We are no longer making music only for the aristocracy. We no longer believe that there's only one holy music from
Right.
God that we must lift everybody else up
Right.
to believe in. We now believe in a multicultural world where everybody brings music that is connected to their own humanity, that deserves to be heard and deserves to be respected and honored in the same way as the music from our past. I have
Mm.
Slovak and Hungarian ancestry, right? My grandmother was really attached to classical music. I grew up with it in my family. So I had some, respect and honor for it because it was around in my life.
Mm.
But we have so many people in our country now that do not come from a European ancestral heritage who do not connect with that music. It's not part of their cultural heritage.
Yes.
And there's a
Yes.
term called acculturation, and acculturation is when a dominant political body forces the subdominant body to give up their culture and adopt the other culture in order to be accepted into the community. And I
Mm.
talked about this in another presentation I gave at the Voice Foundation. And I said that essentially, and I named a county out in LA. This county is like 90% Latinx. That if you are a kid, a high school kid in this community who wants to be a music teacher, you have to give up your cultural heritage. Let's say your family immigrated here from Mexico. You have to give up that cultural heritage. You have to adopt the art song heritage. American, European, you still are adopting art song heritage because that's the only way you can get into 90-something% of music schools in this country for music education.
Yes.
You
Yes.
then get in to study music education, and you have to give up your cultural heritage for 4 years to pass your juries, because the only way you can pass your juries is if you sing your French, German, and Italian art song. The student then graduates 4 years later, a master of this European cultural heritage, to go back to their community, their Latinx community, where they then are going to have to teach the people in their community who do not identify with that cultural heritage, and they're stuck to have to figure out how to do it on their own. And
Oh my gosh.
we can't operate that way and
No,
expect to
no.
have a better, more just society. We have to
Yes.
start honoring and acknowledging everyone's cultural heritage deserves a place, and
Mm-hmm.
that we have to honor where it comes from and teach it. And we've got a lot of work to do in that area.
And also too, we're talking about culture, but by alienating so much of the music that has been alienated in the US, isn't that alienating American culture as well?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. And I
And
mean,
and makes no sense.
yeah. And look,
Yes.
and I think that, and this is why we wanted to come and talk about this, is I think that we are not in the mindset that people are intentionally sitting there at home being like, oh, I'm going to suppress all these things. They're not sitting around deciding intentionally to
No,
suppress these things.
no.
Everybody in academia, we all went through a bachelor's, a master's, and a doctorate where we learned all of these things. We studied. I have my bachelor's, master's, and doctorate all in classical music. I
Mm-hmm.
study classical music theory all the way through. I appreciate it. I actually really like it. It's like my puzzle. That's fun for me.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not a tool set that my rock singers need. They need to know how to run a DAW. They need to know how to sit down with Logic and track out a song. and
They
how to
also-
write a song.
They also need to understand what a pentatonic scale is.
Yeah, they got to also think outside of
Schenkerian analysis.
Right.
Yes, yes.
But so the problem is, though, is that, so many people went through and never got any of the tools to help these students. So we're also kind of stuck, which is where, we're stuck in this world where we have faculty who have not been given the tools to teach this music. We have an accreditation system which requires you to have a doctorate to teach this music. And yet there's only one doctorate in the United States for voice teachers where you can go and learn how to teach whatever it is that you want to teach. And that's a Shenandoah.
Yes,
And
I know. I'm always singing your praises, by the way. I always do. I always.
Well, it's not.
You're
But
making
No, but I acknowledge what you're doing at the university.
I would like to be one of 100, just to put it on the record. I would love to one day be one of 100 universities. And I hope that one day is where we are. But it was not an easy road. And there's a lot of questions. Well, how are we going to do this? And I kept saying, we're going to do what the first music schools did and figure it out. Well, how are you going to evaluate a rapper who wants to get a doctorate? I don't know. We'll figure it out.
Exactly.
Because that's what you do when you're trying to innovate. You figure it out as it comes. And that's hard. Academia is not set up to figure it out. Academia is set up to follow precedent. And so we're lucky that I've got an amazing administration that lets us push the boundaries. And I've got amazing colleagues who look at it and who may be like, look, this isn't my thing, but I get that it's your thing. Go do it. And they give us permission to go play, and they vote for it, and they approve these initiatives that we want to go and we move forward. And I'm just bringing that up, though, because it's not easy and it doesn't happen quickly. And we can't break the system until we start creating these new degrees. Because other great people who are doing this work, there's other people that have doctorates who are teaching CCM, but they had to go and get like an education doctorate and write a dissertation on educational methods. They had to go get, other doctorate degrees without being able to go through the voice pathway to get the credential they needed to get hired in academia. And that limitation of that doctorate slows everything down for the role of progress. And that's why we're kind of like in this stalemate where we're just kind of stuck. Is because we don't have people with the qualifications to teach the thing that I think a growing number of us realize needs to be taught.
Well, that's what, there's quite a number of comments that I want to make based on everything that you've just said. I'll just rattle these off, and they're in no particular order, but what you were talking about that was happening in New York during the Industrial Revolution was also happening in the UK. The people that were listening to this music, creating this music that was not classical music, were deemed to be savages also. So it's not just in the US. I'm also very fortunate to be teaching in a program at an institution where we do have CCM vocal pedagogy. In fact, my PhD was in researching CCM. And what people don't realize that are caught up in this system, in this Eurocentric hierarchy, is, and I can speak about this because of my own experiences, is that I had a fully fledged career for many years, for a number of decades, as a pop rock singer. And it was my only means of income. In fact, and I talk about this often, at one stage I was doing 11 gigs a week, and I did that for 3 months. I put my daughter through a private school education. I paid off my home. I was supporting her as a single mum. It was the only thing that I did, and I was making a lot of money. I didn't even know, as someone that was working in the industry, that this was even a thing till I went to university. So what people need to get out of their heads is people in this world can survive without university. You don't need to have classical training to get a job, because I tell you what, if I had have gone to university and been exposed to this classical music and told that this is the only way you can train to be a singer, I would not be sitting here now. Without a doubt, I would not, because my love was, I was so passionate about pop and rock music from the age of 5. There was nothing else that existed in my world. It was not, it was just even how it made me feel. This music was just made me feel so good. It made me come to life. I was not going to sing classical music. So I would never have had the career path that I've had. And when you talk about the numbers falling across music programs in the US, obviously these programs are starting to become outdated in terms of what students are wanting. So they're not responding to the demands of music markets, the needs of students. Are the students themselves now discovering that they don't need to go there, or is why are they not enrolling in these programs?
I don't know. I think it's a whole other line of research that needs to be
Yeah.
done. I have my speculation from talking to them. And, a lot of it is that, yeah, if they go and they do their college tour and they discover that, that's their only pathway, some of them look at that and go, but I don't want to do that. And so they don't do it. For me, I come from a working class family. My dad is a factory worker. My mom was a teacher, but she was a stay-at-home mother. So, she had gone to college, but she was out of that element when I was trying to go to college myself. My grandfather was a factory worker with an eighth grade education, and him and my dad were bound and determined that I was going to college, period. So you're
Mhm.
right. You don't have to have that. But when you come from a lower income family, there's something about realizing that college can be a step up the financial rung. It still proves true in the United States that a college degree earner earns, I think it's 66% more over the course of their life, $1 million more. And so, that is still a thing. And so there are people like me who I was going to college one way or another, or I was moving out the day I graduated high school. And
Mhm.
so I was going to college. I will go to college.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
was like, what are you going to major in? Well, I had a 2.6 GPA in high school, so my options were pretty much limited. 2.6, if you don't know, that's a C average. And on the
Okay.
border of a D average, it's pretty bad. And I had lots of D's and F's. I was
Hey,
not a
you
But
know
good
you
student.
what? You
got you got
still
all kinds of
passed.
I still
you
passed.
got all kinds of academic awards when you got into college,
Right.
though. You did
But
well.
so, but I was not, so there was nothing else I could do. And I was like, I've got to do music. That's my only pathway.
Mhm.
And when I was told the only pathway for me to do that was classical, and then I was like, okay, I guess that's what I'll do.
Yes.
So, but that shouldn't be our goal, to enroll people
No.
for whom they see that as their only option. And that's why we're saying we just need seats at the table. It's what you're
Right.
saying. We need room for the person for whom something else is their passion. There are still kids out there, I meet them,
And
for whom Mozart, Puccini, Verdi is the dream. That's how they communicate the human
yeah.
experience through
Mhm.
song.
And
And
that's
we should
okay.
lift them
It is
up.
okay.
We
It is
should
okay.
lift
Yes.
them up. We should help educate them to the absolute best that we possibly can. But when we meet the student for whom that is not the passion, we need to start creating some other pathways for them
Yeah.
to find
And
success.
and
Mhm.
those students still exist. The students who come to school and they're told that when they get a vocal performance degree that they'll be able to sing all the things that they want to. And I met one of those students actually here at am I allowed to talk about
Well, I
that?
mean, yeah, I
Here
mean, it was an incoming
it was
freshman.
an incoming freshman who came in and
They had been told before they got here.
that they could just sing the things that they want, and then she gets into the vocal performance degree. And I was asking, it was just it's like a forum for freshmen, and we all the students meet together, and it's all the different disciplines are together, and so they split it up amongst different teachers. And in the group that this one student was in, this student was the only one that was there for vocal performance. So I said, well, of the shows that of all the performances you all are going to for the semester, can you be the classical or the opera expert
Yeah.
or specialist? And the student looks at me and says no. And I said, well, but you're here for vocal performance. And the student looks at me and says, I never sang classically before I came here. I sang in choir, but I sang a lot of pop rock. I sang R&B. I sang popular music. That's what I was singing. But I'm here in vocal performance. And I just looked at the student and I said, okay, do you want to stay in vocal performance? Like, what's the plan here? And the student says, I'm actually planning on trying to transfer into possibly it's the CMed, the commercial music degree.
Yes.
And I said, if you need help with it, I can help you try to help, like, with any of the people you need to talk to or whatever. And the student is gonna try to transfer into it, but that still happens.
Yeah, and I know
Yes.
It's still being told in high schools. Your high school choir directors are still telling their students, you can go to
Yes.
school for vocal performance and you'll be able to sing all the things. And that's not
Mm-hmm.
true. It's like
Mm-hmm.
telling a football player to go to basketball and you'll be able to do all the things.
And the thing is it's like this still exists, but like in our professional forums that are on social media, some of the Facebook forums that we all belong to, that population is not of that mindset. So they're not seeing it. Yet those of us who are auditioning people, they'll say, well, that's not the way that it is anymore. And I agree, in that circle, it's not so much that way anymore. But there are 30,000 voice teachers in this country, and there's only like 7,000 members of one of the forums. So there's 23,000 teachers out there, or 20,000-ish probably at least, that are not in the forum. And I meet their students when I teach workshops.
Yeah.
And they're still being told the same thing. I meet people all the time and say, well, I want to be a musical I want to perform on Broadway, which is why I came to your pop rock workshop for musical theater, but I'm majoring in voice performance. And I look at them and go, why are you majoring in voice performance? Because I need a classical foundation in order to have a career. And I have to tell them this is the wrong move. And it's the wrong move for lots of reasons, not just the voice. It's the wrong move because the acting style for opera is completely different than musical theater. The dance that's in the opera, which is the waltz, if you're lucky, is completely different than tap, jazz, and ballet that they need in musical theater. And the skill set they need to work through the golden age rep, the contemporary rep, and the pop rock in musical theater takes 4 years just to get started with, let alone get a degree in classical voice and then try to jump into it. So unfortunately, there's still students that are being guided down this pathway that's a pathway that's going to roadblock them. That student who tells me, well, I'm going to, and we know friends whose kids have been told this, who are then, their kids are going and majoring in classical music, they're going to struggle. I know, because I work with these people all day, every day. I know the agents and casting directors that cast these shows, and that's not what they're looking for. In fact, they don't want it. There's no room for it to them.
There seems to be two problems as far as I can figure out. One is that the teachers themselves are perpetuating the problem at hand, and that is now filtering through to some of the students as well. And I'll just give you an example of what I mean, is that my students in the popular music program are the victims of some of the backlash of this hierarchy, that they have comments made to them like, oh, you're the pop kids. Do you guys actually sing? Do you have singing lessons? And some of them heard my students. They went, oh, you guys are actually good. I went, oh, okay. So so that's got to be coming from the teaching, because at 18, these kids, they've got to have heard it from somewhere. They're the new generation coming through. The other problem is education institutions. I know you talked about that organization that creates the curricula. But even if we didn't have that problem, I know that at the moment there are only 4 institutions in the US that have CCM vocal pedagogy at a master's or a doctoral level. Is that correct? Used to be 3, but you told me now that there's 4.
I think it's right around 4. There may be 1 or 2.
Okay.
Their groups are starting to catch on.
Okay. Let's just say, even if there were 6, now you have 30,000 teachers, 6 institutions that offer training. So even if teachers are trying to do their best and they're wanting to learn more, where do they go and get that? I mean, the training is not accessible, but where are the teachers to teach them in those programs going to come from if there's no training programs? I mean, so what comes first? Do we have to have more teachers being trained so then they can go into those programs? Do we need programs being created? It's a real dilemma, isn't it?
The chicken before the egg.
Well,
a
it
little
is,
bit.
and that's where, it is, and we need, look, things are shifting, and the younger generation of teachers, the 20 and 30-year-old teachers, there is no debate amongst them. A lot of them, there's some, I'm sure there is, but a lot of the ones I meet are like, yeah, I need to know how to teach belters. How do I do it? And they're ready to go.
Right.
There is no debate in their mind. They know it's time, and they know they didn't learn it, and now they want to learn it. I meet a lot of them. So I think it's a generational shift that's going to happen. I also think it's important to me, like to point out, is I know some of these teachers from different places that are of the classical mindset who would probably never come to one of our workshops, who would probably still say, I still in the core of my heart believe that classical singing is the core of everything. It's, they are trying to do the best with what they were given from their teacher lineage. And that's a hard
Yes.
thing to overcome, as we see in every facet of
Right.
life. When you have
Yes.
poured your heart and soul into something for 30 years and you have seen some results from it work, you can become convinced that, yes, I know this is this. We saw this with COVID. We had people that are like, no, I swear I've never had a vaccine in my life. Vaccines don't work. I don't need them, only to go on and, die from COVID. And so, this happens. So that's where I think that we got to have good, welcoming, open, helpful conversations about this, because there's no bad person in this. It's just
No.
bad information that's been passed down since the 1800s.
Yes.
And we're in a different world now. This is not 1887. And so now that we're sitting here 140 years later, we need to start thinking about the world we live in now and using the tools we have now to help the singers that we have now. And
Yes.
if that's not enough motivation to help the person, the human being, the soul that is sitting in front of you, communicate their most deepest feelings through the music that means something to them, then look at our SWOT article and look at what's coming down the pike if we don't. Because the other thing is I also don't want any of my voice teacher colleagues, whether I know you or not, teaching in academia to become unemployed. Because I grew up in a
Exactly.
family where my father was unemployed all the time because he was a factory worker. Factories laid off people all the time. It's a miserable way to grow up, and I don't want anybody else to have to go through that. And to
Yes.
know and to let people know, look, enrollment is falling. There is a storm coming, which is what that SWOT article is about. We're trying to share this information to not only help the students, but to help our colleagues. David and I talked about this a lot. Jackie and I have talked about it. We do not want to watch anybody go through a collapse of their program. There are lots of ways that every institution, every school can adopt these things. Now, not every school is going to have a rock and roll degree. They don't have to. There's music education programs throughout this country, and the music educators need to know how to direct the musical and direct the pop a cappella group. And if that's all your school can take on because that's all you can do, and you still want to teach classical ideals because choral music has a lot of that still, that's still a better start. It's a move. We're starting
It's
to
a
get
start.
some exposure.
Yes.
Our music therapy programs have music therapists who work with people who are coming back from war, whose musical identity is wrapped around country music or hip hop. And they want to write songs. When they're writing songs to get through their PTSD, they need to write in the kind of music that it connects to them. So another easy start is to make sure that your music therapy programs are exposing your students to the music that their clients must have in order to heal from the conditions that they're seeking a music therapist for. So this doesn't have to be going as radical as like we have, at Shenandoah. There are baby steps that we can take that still allows room for those students who still love the classical music. And there's always going to be Juilliard. There's always going to be the Cleveland Institute of Music. And there's always going to be a need for those specialized opera training programs as well. It's not going away. But it's time to diversify where we can and serve the clients that we can.
And I think if ever we are going to truly have student-centered learning, we must listen to the needs of our students. And that includes what music they want to sing. So people that are saying, oh yes, my teaching is student-focused, and they're telling their students they must sing classical, they are not teaching student-focused approaches. They're not using those approaches. They're still caught up in some sort of master apprentice model where you're saying, this is what you must sing. you want to learn, this is a one size fits all, it's classical music, and this is what you've got to do. That is not student centered learning. And so, if ever we are going to completely take on that model, we have to get rid of those traditions to the point where at least we're listening to the students themselves and what they want and what their needs are. And uh, CCM styles constitute 99% of total music consumption globally. And the big problem with higher education not having training for those students is essentially you're making those students like they're not employable. And if you're a classical singer and you're going down that road of classical training, you have to be one of the 1%.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, you've come across these same numbers too in your research, and other people are writing about this and talking about it.
I mean,
It's not just us.
No, it's
yes. Yes. So, I mean, that's totally unethical. Imagine doing that in a law degree, teaching something that's outdated, that you know that that part of law no longer exists. Let's just say with contracts, and you don't have anything, if it's a contract and it's to do with an artist, and you don't have a clause in there about marketing and social media, that you leave all of that out in the contract. Well, you have to keep updating with the marketplace, don't you? And with technology.
The sad thing, as I know you've come across this in your research, is that there have been discussions about voice teacher licensure and certification since the early 1900s, and there's always been resistance to it. And so we're one of the only fields where there is no continuing education requirement. I mean, the dog groomer has to go get continuing education and a license. And
oh my gosh,
barbers to cut your hair.
Yes.
And so, that is, I think, a tricky part of our profession, is that there is no gate. I mean, SLPs have to do it, but voice teachers don't. And that's tricky.
It is tricky. And I love when I have a student who comes to me, who's had no former training, and says, oh, I actually teach singing at a local school. And I'm going, but you've never had any training. You have really poor technique. You don't do anything correctly or safely or sustainably, and you're teaching singing and you're 18 years old. Imagine the damage that you could potentially be doing.
And I will say that the interesting thing is that part of what I had read about Presser too is Presser felt that there were these charlatan teachers, as I called them, like in the one dissertation I read said, think the Music Man, the musical, where Harold Hill comes in to sell all these kids instruments and then leaves town. So Presser also did notice that this was an issue. And I think that his Etude magazine, MTNA, was a step in trying to address this. So again, this is a 140-year-old problem. This is an issue that's been talked about for a long time.
I also, I mean, with you had said this so beautifully about if we're doing student-based learning, right? If we're doing student-based or teaching, that if we're not teaching what the student wants, then it's not student-led. It's teacher.
No.
And you're
absolutely.
and that lineage. And Matt had even said too, like, that's because the teachers did this, and the teacher, it's like this ancestry, and that whole thing, like, the teacher is the deity. The teacher is like speaking
the master,
the musical God, and who is going to be leading it to you, and it should be a collaboration. And I think that can be scary for teachers, for private teachers who've never done that before, or who have never had a teacher of their own who has said to them, what do you want to sing? Or what do you want to do? Or what are you experiencing when we're doing this? Do you like the sound that you're making? What is the sound that you actually want to make? Because I'm going to help you try to find that. I have to take a lot of judgment that I have from what my students are doing, I have to take the I don't know how to word this in a
You have to take
way.
our
Just
own
like
bias out of
I
the
can't, yeah,
picture.
my own bias. I have to take my own
Yes,
bias out of it. And
100%.
I think that that's can be really scary for teachers who a lot of times, like how we were taught, there is it I'm going to go back to classical singing. It's a very specific sound. And also like when we let's I mean I don't want to go into term talk, but we could talk about how CCM, how some people say, well, CCM is too broad of a term. Oh, it absolutely 100% is. CCM is a very broad term, but somebody had to create a term for it because there was not really
Yes,
a term for it, right? So
yes,
we know that
yes,
there's R&B, we know that
yes.
there's
Hmm.
country, and there's but the same thing happens in classical music. You have French melody singers. You also have early music. You have baroque singing. You have people who are really 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 well versed in singing Verdi, and some people who are really good at singing Wagner. So I mean it's that happens everywhere, but there's specific sounds that have to be made for those specific genres of music, and you have to know what that sound is. And you have to and you also like have to truly listen to the student and ask them what they want, ask them what they're into. What is it that you just sang this song for me, what did you like about what you did, what would you have changed, how can
Hmm.
I help you? It's not
Yes.
about me saying, you know what, you should sing this louder and higher and blah 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 blah. I mean sometimes I have to do that,
Hmm.
but
Oh,
for the
yes.
most part it's really what the student
Yeah.
wants, it's student led. And
Hmm.
I there
And
needs, yeah,
that's hard because a lot of our teachers that we work with were never given that opportunity
never,
themselves.
a teacher never
Yes,
said to them,
Nobody, right? And
yes.
so you didn't have that. And so it's again, it's not anybody's fault. We are just where we are. It's not about finger pointing, but it's
no.
about acknowledging, look, let's talk about the elephant in the room. This is what is going on. We got to
Hmm.
figure a way out of this because this is,
Hmm.
not
Hmm.
helping a lot of people. There's got to be ways that if we start this dialogue that we can all start, troubleshooting together,
Right.
So
together as a
where
community.
do we start that dialogue? I mean,
Well,
do we need to check in with ourselves first? What are our biases? How
right.
can we do better? Then do we go and speak to other teachers? Do we form an organization? How do we create change? How do we get this movement going? Because I tell you what, I'm really keen to get it going,
I
and I'm happy to
well
work with you to get
and
it
I think
going.
I think that teachers want it. I think administration needs to understand what's going on too. I mean,
Yeah,
I do, and I think our administration has been really
they've been great.
good.
Yeah.
They've been great, and but I don't know how many other schools are willing to hear like you need some contemporary stuff
Mm.
going on here. We need to.
Yes.
But
Look,
I also wonder too. Oh, sorry, I'll probably go on a
well, I
tangent.
was going to say, but it is also happening. Look, Nats with Alan Henderson as the executive director has
Yes.
changed in
Love Alan.
unbelievable ways. If you would have
Hmm.
told me the Nats would have made that shift from when I first was introduced to Nats as a singer, I would have been like, yeah, that'll never happen. And Alan is with all the presidents, because it's also the presidents and the boards of directors that have existed in the last 20 years. They have turned that ship in a massive direction, and they
They
deserve a lot
certainly
of
have.
credit, but they
Hmm.
only have about 7,000 members and there's 30,000 voice teacher websites. All right. There's about
Mm.
30,000 voice teacher websites. And so that's a small sliver. We have the International Voice Teachers, a mix. They're doing great work too. The Institute for Vocal Advancement, I think it is. They're doing great work. So there's all these groups that are doing great work. So I think if anything, it's doing kind of what we're doing at the CCM Institute, which is all of us realizing we're stronger together and take down the barriers of this camp versus that camp, take down all the animosity that may have existed in the past between this pedagogical method and this pedagogical method, and all of us work together to be like, look, the goal is to communicate the human experience through song, and that's what we're all trying to help
Yes.
other people do.
Hmm.
So how do you do it? This is how I do
Right.
it. Why do you do it that way? Oh, this is why I do it that way. And us
Hmm.
start having an open mind to have these conversations so we unite, because I still think there's a
Yes.
little bit too much of, well, that's not the right way to do it. Well, maybe
Oh,
let's talk
yes. You
about
only
it
have to
instead.
read the forums on social
Yeah.
media. There's still people
I,
who have a lot to say on those forums, and underlying passive aggressive. I don't comment on those forums. I advertise my podcast on there, but I
Yeah.
don't comment. I'm still scared. I'll speak on this platform, but I'm scared to pipe up on those forums.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but that's, and again, though, that is the system. The system used to be very much that way because in academia, this is how it's done,
Well,
which again comes to
which
Etude magazine.
but this is a
Yes.
That's
but
the
I mean,
roots.
are we allowed to talk about what that is?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean,
About
because
NASM.
I also I
Well, can I
I
just
don't like
say
I
something?
just have yes, go ahead.
Yeah, all I was going to say is I'll make this really quick. I'll let you say what you have to say. Is that you, both of you, and myself are in a position of privilege where we are able to speak up because
Yes.
of where we're working. My
Yes.
university is supporting the work that I'm doing. Your university is supporting the work you're doing. I know there are a lot of teachers who are scared to speak up for fear of losing their jobs. And I
Absolutely.
kind of feel that we have a responsibility then in our place of privilege to start making some noise for
Yes.
change,
Yes.
because we're not going to lose our jobs. In fact, our universities are going to be happy about us speaking up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I totally
It
agree.
is.
Yeah.
And I mean, and that's the, we were talking about, NASM. Our school withdrew from NASM. NASM, the National Association of Schools of Music, the accrediting body, about 3 years ago, our university said enough, and we withdrew because we knew that NASM was holding us back.
And I think that NASM's holding a lot of people.
It's
I mean,
holding a
I'm
lot.
going to say it loud. I really do. I think accreditation
And I don't,
can get,
and if somebody is part of NASM and you're going, then that's not the case, then we need to do a better job of explaining what the standards actually mean. Because what I've witnessed at my schools is that here's the NASM standards. Our last review, we were told this, so that we better do. And usually it was something that was outdated that we needed to be doing, that we're sticking to, because we're afraid that if we don't do that by the next NASM review, it's going to be an issue.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you look at their standards, they have no standards for popular music degree programs. Now, they'll say, well, you can suggest a program or create one. That's great. So we have a blank slate that we don't know if you're even going to like, that you may not even approve. So you want me to do all of the hundreds of hours of work to propose something to which you might look at and go, nah, I'm not sure about that.
but
That's
Yes.
the problem when
Yeah.
they do not have standards, when they have not put in the work to form standards for what commercial music integration looks like at the academic level. It leaves everybody in limbo land where they're hesitant to try to take this beast on because they don't know if it's going to get approved.
Right.
They don't know how it's going to affect their next review, and they feel stuck.
Yeah.
And so that's where I also,
It's-
that's holding
And
us
it's
down.
that too. I mean, and I would need to look into this, but I feel, do we know what the people who are doing the accreditation, do we know what their musical focus has been in their lives? Is
Well,
it
it's
usually
everybody
classical
who's,
music,
it's a
or
lot
is
of
it
times is it's people who are running programs, so they're all classically trained
classically trained?
musicians.
And then
Mm.
the other thing too, if we want to talk about going down the pipeline, I teach private lessons. I used to only teach private lessons to middle school and high school students. I don't do contests. I don't do competitions. It's just something. That's another talk for another day. But
Yes.
but there are solo and ensemble contests, and I'd have to know. I don't help with these things, and so I don't know if this still happens. But back in the day, and at least probably 5 to 10 years ago, the only things that you could sing for solo and ensemble contests for your county, your district, your state, whatever, it was always something that was classical, usually in a foreign language. And so if we want to talk about making change, I don't think that change can just happen in higher education. I think it needs to happen in private schools. I know that my kids go to a private elementary school where they are singing a lot of popular music. They're singing songs that they want to sing, which is great. But I
Yes,
don't know
they
what
do
like
here in
good.
Australia.
And but I also don't know what happens in the middle schools and high schools. I'll find that out next year when my kid goes to middle school. But I also don't think it's the teacher's fault. It's probably what is being told, that the teacher has to teach in choir. Do you have to
Yeah.
sing Latin? Do you have
Curriculum.
to sing the curriculum? So I mean,
Mm.
I think
Well,
I think giving students a wide variety of music to be able to sing, but also learning how to teach it too,
And
you know.
what's interesting is that the music educators, so the people, so in the United States, if you major in music education, that you're looking at, our K through 12 system, which is basically from the age of 5 to the age of 18.
Same as
Research,
ours.
okay,
Okay.
yeah. So researchers in that field have been very progressive for a very long time, dating back to this Tanglewood symposium that happened in the
No, that's
1960s,
right. Yeah.
and they have been pushing for this. But again, the issue is that when you work in academia and you want to make curricular changes at the academic level, it has to go through academic cabinet and all of these other things where it has to be voted on by the entire faculty. Now, at Shenandoah, when we put things through for an entire faculty vote, my colleagues are super supportive. They vote and approve what they know we think is best move. We all do it for each other, but not all schools are that way. And
No.
so it's very easy at other schools for faculty who really do not want to see this change happen to vote things down or to otherwise roadblock. So there, there are a lot of us out there. There are a lot of us out there in our little pockets trying to make things happen. It's just when you look at the big picture and you see these stories, you meet these people who
Yeah.
are being told these things, that you start to realize, wow, we can't just sit back and go, well, things are much better now. It feels like it when I'm in my group of people, when I'm surrounded by my CCM
Right.
Institute faculty, when
Yeah.
I'm surrounded by people at my conferences I go to, I'm like, wow, our world is getting much better. And then I meet a
Mm.
high school student at a recruiting event, and I'm like, nope, nope, no, actually,
There's
nope,
still,
we
yeah.
still got work to do. And
Yes.
so, but I think that, there are a lot of people that deserve credit. Music therapy people the faculty members have been really progressive because they know that's the only way they can help their clients. You can't help a client with Caro Mio Ben when trying to write a song about their post-traumatic stress
I mean, you can.
from war.
That's a choice.
You can, but it's not going to work. It's not going to connect with
It's
the client. It's not going to help them.
no, it wouldn't help my stress levels. It would
Me
No.
it
neither.
would
And
make mine peak.
and there was research done that looked at the first 6 months of music therapists' careers and how many of them get vocal pathologies that sideline them. That it is a
Mm.
significant percentage of music therapists end up with an injury in their first 6 months of practice because they're not being taught how to sing the kind of stuff that they're going to sing once they're actually in the clinic. And
Yes.
so we're
Yes.
failing those students. We're literally doing
Yes.
something that's leading to physical harm. And
Hmm.
that's where, like, when I sit back and go, okay, so do I come out and talk about this or do I just keep it to myself? I feel like I have no choice but to talk about it because we have
Yes.
people that are literally getting hurt. And when people are becoming physically injured because they are not given the tools to do the thing that their heart's desire is, what they feel like they have to do, it's their calling, and we got to figure out how to help. And
Yeah.
that's why these conversations I just think are so
Yeah.
critical, even though they're tough, even though they stir up controversy,
Yeah.
even though, it can lead to some hard conversations. We got to start having them because there's too many people that are getting left behind. And that's not what we're supposed to be doing as educators. We're
No.
supposed to be figuring out how to lift
No.
everybody up.
Exactly, exactly. Look, I'm going to start winding this up. You two have been so generous with your time, and you have children that are watching a movie, so you could talk to me.
I know.
And
I almost forgot we had kids.
Yeah, I know. They may be asleep. We'll find
I,
out
for-
here in a little bit.
I forgot about the kids, and they're probably eating all the popcorn in the house, plus all the lollies, everything. They probably had pillow fights, and there's feathers everywhere, but that's all good. Okay, so in wrapping up, any piece of advice you would like to share with our voice community?
I mean, piece of advice. Listen to your student. Let your student tell you what they need and what they want. And just and literally and listen to another really cool thing to do is ask them to create a playlist of maybe 10 to 15 songs that they feel like they really love, maybe something that they would like to sing someday, or things that really speak to them, and listen, really listen to them, and also
Mm,
listen to your student. Um and if you're somebody at a university who wants this change, I don't know. I guess they could reach out or whatever,
Yeah, reach out. I
but
mean,
also, like, contact your administration and let them know that you're not the only school that wants this. That there's schools that are making this happen, and we're
mhm.
doing it. I mean, we're living proof, and our administration has listened, and we're making a lot of students professionals now, and they're singing the way that they want to sing. They're not
And
They didn't start out singing one way and then get molded into singing a different way. They're
Yes,
they're
doing it.
not
likewise.
and the biggest thing is too that I'm always shouting from the rooftops, they're not getting hurt.
No.
We do not have any new vocal injuries that are not related to something outside of our control. So what I mean by that is we had a student who had COVID and who coughed himself into a vocal hemorrhage. You can't prevent that. That is
No,
not
that's
from her
different.
singing. She had
Yes.
COVID and it was real bad and she got a hemorrhage. We
Hmm.
had a student who had a cyst in high school who came to us and who was doing really, really well until they got really, really sick. Everything flared up from the flu and from some other emotional stress and muscular tension dysphonia. And when they saw a surgeon, the surgeon's like, we should maybe just take care of this now at this point in time. And they did. But those are the kinds of things we deal with.
Hmm.
I don't have new
Hmm.
cases of nodules showing up
No.
because
None.
we teach the kids the thing they want to do. When I came
Hmm.
here, there was a lot of kids with nodules. And I was like, why? Well, they weren't teaching them to belt for the first 2 years. So my first year here, I'm walking down the hallways and I hear screaming.
Yelling. Yes.
Oh,
And I'm going, who is this kid screaming? And I'd go look in the window and it's a freshman. I'd go look in the window and it was a sophomore. And I'm like, well, the kids have nodules because we're not teaching them to belt and they're teaching themselves to belt. Because I saw kids in a room together trying to teach each other.
hmm.
And I remember I was in a faculty meeting and I was like, that's the reason they're getting hurt. It's not because belting's inherently bad. It's
Hmm.
because
It's
we don't
because
help
they,
them for
yeah.
2 years and they're
Yes,
going to do it
yes.
whether we want them to or not.
Yeah.
And everybody
Mm.
looked at that and they're like, you know what, you're right. And I was like, can we do an experiment and teach them to belt from their freshman year? And you know what? When we did, the rate of vocal pathologies plummeted to nothing.
Yeah, of
So all of a
course.
sudden, the kids were getting the help that they needed for the thing they
Hmm.
wanted to do. And my
Hmm.
colleagues are great teachers.
Hmm.
They were able to help them. So it's just, it's these little changes. My little piece of parting advice is, or, thought is be the teacher you needed in that moment.
Yeah.
Not the teacher you
Yeah.
had, but the teacher
Teacher
you
you
needed.
needed.
So when
Love
you have
that.
that student who's standing in front of you who's saying, but my heart's really drawn to this song, and you're listening to that song and you're going, I hate this song. This is not for
Mm.
me.
Hmm.
Be the
Hmm.
teacher you needed when you were in that kid's shoes and say, you know what? I'll
Let's
figure
do
out
it.
how to help you. Let's figure it out and
That's
figure it out
amazing.
together. When you have
Brilliant.
that student who's in emotional distress, and you remember your teacher who from Etude magazine, their lineage goes back to Etude magazine, where they tell you how to discipline your students and how to get your students to snap into shape, who was harsh to you, who said, well, you just need to suck it up and you just need to learn how to deal because this is just the business.
Emotions are on outside the door.
Right? Don't be that teacher. Be the teacher you needed in that moment and help your student
Amazing.
figure out how to deal with their emotional distress. Refer them out if it's not something that you can help with, but be the person who's there for them. Because when we do that, then we cultivate artists. We cultivate human beings who have something they can share with others. There's something important that they want to say, and we're going to make the world a better place. And the dream is to have institutions where there's a reason to go to an institution. And the reason you go to an institution is because you as a singer-songwriter get to be surrounded by symphonic musicians who change your thought about the way that you write backing instruments into your songs. Because you're surrounded by dancers who make you rethink how movement might be a
Yes.
part of your concerts. Because you're surrounded by the musical theater kid who tells stories in a really deeply connected way that makes you rethink how you might tell your breakup story, so that then when you go and put on your final culminating performance, you have all kinds of elements that you would have never have come up with on your own in your own bedroom without the influence of all of those other artists surrounding
Exactly.
you. And that is the conservatory of the future. The conservatory of the future is the place where all of these
All of it.
cultural heritages come together, and we dump artists from all different backgrounds together and say, make something happen. And they create things that we can't even imagine right now because we don't have enough multicultural institutions. If you want to see where the potential can be and where it can go watch the performances of students from Berkeley, because Berkeley is
Yes.
already doing this.
I
It's
spent a
very
week at
incredible
Berkeley.
stuff.
Yes, I
And it's
love their
incredible, isn't
program.
it?
Yes,
They're
yes,
making incredible
absolutely.
music.
Hmm.
Because that's
They
what
are.
happens when you honor all cultural heritages. You teach people the music that they want to learn, and you lift them up and help them succeed.
Yes, I have a student that's coming into my program next year. I teach across all 3 years in the Bachelor of Popular Music program. And I have two internationals. One is from Norway and a boy from Greece who wants to sing he wants to put a modern twist into some of the traditional music. So I'm highly excited by that. I keep you posted as to how that's going to turn out.
Yeah.
But look, thank you so much. We're going to share the links to all your work. You have books, I have one of your books, the rock and roll book.
Thank you.
I have your paper, but I'm going to share the links to all your work in the show notes for our audience to go and follow you up and look at what you're up to next. And I feel that we need to regroup at some stage and see if there's any shifts happened or if there's anything that you want to talk about further. I would love to have you back. This has been truly fascinating and I appreciate you. Keep up the amazing work.
Thank you for having us, and thank you for giving us an opportunity to talk about this. This is the first time we've dived this deep in a public forum about this information. We're going to start trying to do some more with it because it needs to get out there, but we really appreciate the opportunity to get the conversation started.
You know what? Anytime, I'm up for it, and you can go as deep as you want here.
Thank you.
It's all good. Thank you so much. And you better go and check on those kids.
I know. I'm running upstairs.
Yes.
So it makes me a little nervous.
Yeah. So take care. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.